Começa.
Tá bom, então.
Você só me confirma se está aparecendo no YouTube.
Tá bom.
Can we start, Michele? Can we start?
Sim, já estamos ao vivo.
Como é que tá o som?
Tá ótimo.
Tá? Beleza. Agora entrou alguém aqui, eu vou pedir para fechar. Ai, que dia. Gente, good morning. Eu estou aqui com vocês, but because of technical problems we had with the main computer, I had to come to another room, and unfortunately, fortunately, it's going to happen. So we apologize for all these technical problems, and this will be a session in English because of our international colleagues and friends from abroad. It is something, if you don't understand English, you can watch it through YouTube with simultaneous translation. You can translate it in Portuguese later on. Is this sound okay? Vocês podem me dar joinha aí para falar se o som tá bom aí na sala? Is the sound okay in the room? Okay, right. So something important for you to know, right? Why we have decided to invite all of these international colleagues and friends, Professor Brian Morgan, Professor Jamille Pinheiro-Dias, Professor Joe Windle, and Professor Miriam Jorge. First of all, because one of the objectives of the National Literacies Project, Projeto Nacional de Letramentos, back in time in 2009, was to foster international academic partnership. And as you will see, as I introduce our speakers today, they have collaborated with Projeto Nacional de Letramentos for a long time. For example, I think all of them, Brian has been with us since the start, since the beginning, since 2009, Brian, if I'm not mistaken. So Joe as well, Jamille as well, and Miriam when she was a professor at the Federal University of Minas Gerais. So it's very important for you to know that we do have international collaboration, and this has been very fruitful along the years of our studies and our research collaboration together. So the idea for today, I will briefly introduce our speakers. And of course, because of the digital limitations, right, we wanted to do more like a chat. But so what I told them to do, we send the same questioning, the same questions and comments that you sent to us. So all of these comments that we have worked along the 2 days of the event this year, I translated these comments into English. And Joe, Jamille, Brian, and Miriam, I'm sorry for the terrible translation, but such a rush. So I translated all of them into English, and I sent them. I sent all these comments to them, and then I asked them to choose one or two themes to talk about these themes in their context abroad. Of course, we invite them to talk about Brazilian education as well, because as I told you, all of them have worked with us for more than 10 years now, for more than a decade, okay? And then Joel will start, and then Miriam, and then Brian, and then Jamille. So after these 10 to 15 minutes presentations, again, I'd like to emphasize, because of digital limitations, we decided to do it like this. We will have around 10 to 15 minutes of question and answers session. So you can ask the questions from there, because we have a computer there with Michele, or you can write your questions on the chat. E aí, there's a link on the YouTube on the QR code, but you can also, if you type GL Daniel Ferraz on YouTube, you will find this live. Okay, is it clear? So I will bring to the screen our speakers, our conversadores. Joel, welcome. So Joel is professor at the University of South Australia.
Hi, Danielle. Hi, everybody. Bom dia.
Bom dia. Thank you, Joe. And then Brian Morgan. Brian, such a long time. Welcome from Canada. Mike is off. Yes.
Bom dia, todos e todas. Hi, Daniel. Good to see you again. Joel, Miriam. Yes.
Very
Jamille.
good.
Great.
And then Miriam. I don't know if Miriam is in Brazil or in the United States. Good morning, Miriam.
Good morning. Bom dia. Prazer estar aqui.
And then Jamille. Hi, Jamille.
Hi, Daniel. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. Thank you.
Very good. So can we start with Joe then? Yes. Let me ask Miriam, Jamille, Brian, and Joe. Do you want to stay with Joe during the presentation here?
Yes.
Because I can put you. Yes. Okay. Great. So let me just add Joe's presentation. Joe, welcome. Thank you very much. Welcome to Projeto Nacional, and we are here to talk to you a little bit.
Okay, thanks, Danielle. It's an honor to be here at home with everyone at the Projeto Nacional, and it's nice to be on this panel with my esteemed friends and colleagues. So looking forward to sharing some ideas. I'm going to focus on theme 1, which is working conditions and teacher training, and then the imagined futures of literacies and education. So in the spirit of solidarity with the comments in reaction to this theme, I'm going to share some of the challenges faced by teachers in Australia, and then focus on neoliberalism as a prevailing condition there, and then discuss some data from teachers in Brazil, focusing a bit more on neo-nationalism as a lens, and then share some hopefully positive ideas for the future, focusing on the concept of linguistic citizenship and the concept of educational citizenship, with a view to expanding our idea of what we understand by citizenship. So, Danielle, I'm going to try and start the slideshow. So tell me if the slide...
It's working. Yeah, it's working. Just tell me if it works for you there, if you can show from there and pass the slides from there. Can you?
Okay, are you on slide 2?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So in relation to Australia and teachers' work, there's been a lot of research about the concept of time poverty, which is the idea that teachers' work is not only taking up more of their time, but because this work is more complex, there's been a change in the quality of teaching experience as well as the quantity, and that this is a problem that can be captured by the notion of time poverty and the intensification of teachers' work. So I think that's a problem that many in Brazil will also identify with. Another dimension of teachers' work which has changed over time is what types of tasks teachers are asked to perform, and the way that teachers consider some parts of their work to be meaningful and legitimate, and other parts to be in conflict with what we understand to be ethical and critical work as teachers. So that tension between the meaningful and legitimate part of work and illegitimate demands on our time or work that has marginal value is a tension which is growing, at least in Australia. And I'm going to share a little bit of some of the thoughts of Australian teachers. So thinking about how teachers reflect on their work, talk about their work, and evaluate what is positive and negative in their work, I've been trying to use the concept of boundary work and a related idea of border talk to think about how we, in the staff room with our colleagues on the weekend, evaluate the types of work that we are asked to perform. And so I think that this notion of boundary work can be valuable if we're looking at the types of comments which many people made in response to theme 1. So to give an idea, this is from an Australian teacher talking about their experiences and identifying a mismatch between a role of being a data collector compared to the joy and the pleasure of teaching. So this respondent to our research project in South Australia said, education has become much more about data analysis, admin processes that take away from the joy and pleasure of teaching and learning. Demands on classroom teachers have grown, as have the complexities that our communities face on so many levels. Funding for students, especially those with learning needs, has become an administrative endeavour and has taken away from the real support students and educators need. Data collection needs to be streamlined and more real and relevant, as there are times when things really do double up. Smaller class sizes and adequate educator resourcing for students in class should be a given. Another complaint by Australian teachers is that they are asked to do work which really has no value. So talking about school leaders and also system leaders, teachers say things like this. They're always trying to implement site-wide strategies into our class in a very, very rigorous, specific way, which there's been times when they've been awesome, but they're becoming more and more strict and narrow. And collecting data for the sake of collecting data to present to colleagues who are also presenting data that they don't want to collect or present, with no vision as to where it's going, who it's for, other than for each other, when we would rather spend our time actually working with students rather than collecting data about how a strategy we didn't want to do has or hasn't gone. And sometimes there's a bit of faking involved because of how rigorous it's become. So not only do we have to do all this stuff, then what we're presenting maybe isn't even completely true. And just one final quote from an Australian teacher. They say, for example, if I have someone from central office that goes, I want to come in and do some classroom observations, and then I want to come in and have a chat with you. And they'll go, oh, that teacher, they really were falling over with that. And you go, well, no, because they are also managing these other 5 things that were going on, but you're only looking for that. You've got complete lack of perspective of what was actually going on in that space, in that moment, and that's not helpful. So we need to be able to see the strengths in what we do. And just kind of finishing up then on the Australian research, we also had a survey of teachers, and the survey had data on how much time teachers spend on different tasks and what proportion feels stressed a lot. So what's interesting is that the more time that teachers spend on administration, the red line, the more stressed they feel. The more time they spend on marking, the more stressed they feel. But the more time they spend actually face-to-face with students, there's not an increase in the proportion feeling stressed a lot. So what this suggests is that for teachers in Australia, the face-to-face relationship with students in the classroom is what gives them a sense of professional pleasure, satisfaction, enjoyment, but it is other dimensions of teachers' work, such as administration, marking, and lesson planning, which are making teaching more challenging, more difficult, and taking away teachers' own autonomy and control. Moving on then to conditions in Brazil and thinking about specifically language teachers in Brazil, as well as neoliberalism, which was exemplified in the Australian case, we have this phenomenon of neo-nationalism where suddenly teachers are not just possibly incompetent, but also very dangerous. So I think the figure that emerges of teachers presenting a risk to students, to families, to social order, to the nation, was quite present in research that we undertook with language teachers and also in the wider literature. So this concept of securitization or insecuritization, where concepts of danger, risk, violence dominate the experience of communication, teaching, or other activities, is a valuable lens to consider some of the challenges identified for theme 1. So we can see that particularly in Brazil, human rights discourses are used to respond to this, but often appeals to human rights can fall on deaf ears, or appeals to human rights may not be listened to by school administrators or by commercial course administrators. And so other types of talk, other ways of coping, other ways of going around these challenges of securitization also emerge. And we also see strategies of self-protection. So thinking about this, talking about teaching, the talk that teachers have about what they do compared to the talk that parents who are worried about teachers might have, compared to the talk that school leadership or school owners might have. We can think about this in terms of metapragmatic discourse. And so what a teacher might present metapragmatically as critical reflection or questioning, asking questions in a classroom, might be reevaluated or reframed in a different metapragmatic discourse as indoctrination. If we name inequalities in our classroom, that can be reevaluated or reframed as productive of inequalities. And a classic example, if we talk about racism, then according to this discourse of dangerous teachers, we are producing racism. If we talk about gender and sexuality, then we are promoting so-called deviant identities. Or if we talk about those issues, they are maybe not dangerous, but they are irrelevant. They are me, which is self-pitying and unworthy complaining. So just a couple of quotes from Brazilian teachers. So the first one here, which are translated from Portuguese, depending on the space you are in, you don't have an opening. You really have to choose, either you stay employed or you get into a fight. Take up questions of a more critical nature and risk losing my job, right? So I think that at the moment, especially in the political moment that we are living, we are in a very delicate situation to address some issues. I don't say all, but some, yes. We still have to be very careful. So I think there are emotions such as fear, a fear of how far I can go, what I can say, what I can't say, what I'd better leave aside in a way, right? So this idea of fear is the flip side of the notion of danger. So teachers are dangerous, but also teachers are in a position of being fearful. Another one here, giving an example of a teacher who is imagining the kind of reaction that a parent might have if there is any kind of mention of something like a condom, and the teacher says you are eternally on a tightrope. So I think this kind of the tightrope metaphor is useful for thinking about the challenges that come from bringing together neo-nationalism and neoliberalism. So I'm going to leap ahead from this quote. Just putting these ideas then into a graphic representation. In terms of that neo-national orientation, language is a code to be taught. Uses of language should be determined by family and church. Linguistic innovations are a threat to social order. The teacher is a technicist. There's a naturalization of inequalities, and critical language education is presented as a threat to security. The neoliberal metapragmatic regime is that of a global market in English, commodified language learning, commercial packages and preset interactional models. The teacher is a compliant servant to their employer and to customer demands. In terms of critical language education, it might be viewed as disobedient or irrelevant to the purpose of schooling. So I know I've gone over my time, but I guess emphasizing that teachers still find a way to bring out critical perspectives, to promote dialogue, to try and go as far as they can in border talk. And I think there are some collective strategies that are useful, including debriefing with colleagues outside of school, including union organising, publications such as Manual de Defesa contra a Censura nas Escolas provide resources that teachers have used, and many teachers, individuals and collectives representing teachers have mounted successful legal challenges against some of the laws seeking to censor teachers. And I've kind of run out of time, but I guess the end point for an alternative perspective would be to try and develop citizenship through education, linguistic citizenship through language education, and to think about citizenship as beyond the scale of the nation state and even beyond the citizenship of the protest movement, to think about other orientations to citizenship, other modes of action, sites of action and ontologies, including those that are part of Indigenous sovereignty. So I'll stop sharing and stop speaking, and my apologies for going over time. Over to you, Danielle.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you so much. Something that caught my attention for us to talk amongst ourselves and with the audience is this idea that the platformization. Yesterday we had Jamille, Miriam, Brian, and Joe, who are not here. But just let me tell you, we had an amazing day yesterday. And what caught my attention is from the 5 topics that you also get there with you guys, the room with digital literacies, internet, artificial intelligence was the one with half of the audience. So we have more than 100 people with us. So you see how this is something that we really have to talk about. And when you said the fake work, Joe, I think I have here in the state of São Paulo the impression that the teachers are being led to fake work because they cannot do anything that they were educated in their language teacher education because they have a platform and they have to do it. And they're being, like Michel Foucault, they're being, it's like the discipline of the bodies of these teachers. They have to do what they tell you to do. Not even, nothing different. Não tem uma vírgula, Joe, que pode mudar. Então, assim, so complicated, the context, and this is why we keep talking, right? So thank you so much. Over to you, Miriam. Miriam, guys, as I told you, if you don't know, Miriam Jorge, she was a professor here in Brazil, and now she is professor at the University of Missouri, St.Luis, a dear friend of mine. Welcome, Miriam. Muito obrigado. Where are you, Miriam? US or Brazil?
I'm in Belo Horizonte right now. Yes, getting ready to fly back to to St. Louis. And thank you for the invitation. Every time I am invited for a talk or a conversation like this, I can't stop thinking about the previous interactions I've had with each of you, and I'm glad. I know there are some colleagues and friends in the audience, so it's always a pleasure. And also, I try to bridge my previous experience as a scholar in Brazil, and I'm a scholar now in the United States. And it's very interesting, especially in the past 5 years, when I remember when I left, it was 2019, and everybody said, oh, this is the right moment to leave the country. I wasn't leaving Brazil behind in 2019 after the 2018 elections. That wasn't a motivation at all. And then there was a pandemic, and I was living in the United States under certain circumstances that I don't think I need to explain today, and I won't. And then nowadays, here I am again facing issues and conversations around like transnational or multinational versions of schools without parties, or these kinds of censorships, and people still panicking about bathrooms in schools, what they will look like, who will be able. So, and when I moved that this context further back in the beginning of my career, and I think when I started shaping my identity as a teacher educator, I remember that the questions we had as researchers, or that my students and teacher candidates had at that time, weren't so different from the ones that were framed in the topics that Danielle sends to us to think about and bring to this conversation with you. So when I was reading that, I was thinking about the challenge that is to keep in this career for such a long time in education, keeping hope and joy. And perhaps this might be, it's as Freire says, these are requirements for teaching. Teaching requires joy. Teaching requires hope. And we, especially in times that we are living nowadays, when some, I've seen, like, for instance, last AAAL, ILA conference, there was a strand about VUCA times. Here's when my pronunciation will fail me. Volatile times. Okay, forget. At times, uncertain times, complex times. And so I thought, oh, I know it comes again from neoliberal discourses about the world, how to frame the world, but finally we have an acronym to talk about the complexities or the challenges or how we feel lost among all the layers of these historical facts affecting education. When my first teacher education experience was as a student in high school, normal school. And I remember when my teachers went on strike and how mad they were at the governor at that time in the state of Minas Gerais, because his response to the strike was sending the firefighters to spray the teachers protesting. They were protesting in the Praça da Liberdade, the Freedom Square in Belo Horizonte. And so the firefighters sprayed them, women, with water. And he claimed the problem wasn't that those teachers weren't well paid. The problem was that they weren't well married. So it's not the income for women wasn't perceived as relevant of the income of a man or a husband so these attacks on the profession, if during the dictatorship time or dictatorship in Brazil, or the transition to democracy in Brazil, or contemporary threats to teachers' autonomy, plus neoliberalism and all these standardization, platformizations, and Joe used the word fake, which I liked. I associated to a time when we used to say and repeat here in Brazil that teachers pretend to teach and students pretend to learn. This has never been the truth, but it was perhaps a way to frame this idea of, at the end of the day, there is a sense of frustration because professionals in education, they are like engaged in providing the best educational experience to their students under the most diverse circumstances, working conditions, geographic areas that are more or less affected by the inequalities that affect Brazil. So when you brought us these questions, and I chose the topic, language education and critical literacies, I thought perhaps this is what embraces everything. Because when you think about language education beyond teaching languages or foreign languages, modern languages, that as we used to call these languages, we are thinking about discourse analysis. We are thinking about multilingualism in contemporary societies, when every citizen needs to be educated to regarding language as social practice, not as our practice on daily lives, but the practices that are shaping how we see and act in the world. And so it's the famous read the word to read the world that we can use again and again and rewrite the same meanings in so many different ways, depending on what theoretical framework we are using. So I was glad to see that nowadays the discussions involve indigenous and quilombola and popular literacies that should be part of our curriculum, or perhaps in part of the education of teachers. And when Joe was talking about citizenship and linguistic and languages in relation to that, I think I remember, or I have to stop and reflect on how we've been making room for these different literacies as citizenship rights, not just the citizenship rights for those minoritized groups, but also the citizenship rights of our teacher candidates, of to become the critical global citizens that they want to be when they choose the education as a career, education as a profession. I think one thing that hasn't changed is the interest in changing, promoting changing children's lives. Sometimes the discourses sound of like, why have you chosen to be a teacher? Discourses vary from a naive love for children as a response, but moving perhaps to transformation, social transformation, or angry angry towards what's happening in the world, anger. I mean, so this is just summarize that this idea of indigenous quilombola and more recently digital literacies, and then you brought the theme of artificial intelligence that requires other ways of thinking and of digital literacies and literacies for using or even for creating new generative AI tools. Or so I'm going to skip a few slides. I hope you forgive me, but this is supposed to be a conversation, so it's more informal. So, and I'm glad to share this with everybody if you think it's relevant. So thinking about popular literacies, graffiti, funk, slam poetry, community press, critiques of inequalities, and again, youth creativity online. I don't think we shaped, if we would have shaped this conversation around digital literacies related to youth, like perhaps 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So this is good. So sometimes the questions look like they're the same questions. However, we are bringing new layers of this complex world, of these uncertain times, and citizenship rights for everyone. So you also highlighted, for instance, how we need to envision reparative or restorative futures, considering this, we used to call these difficult conversations. They shouldn't be difficult, perhaps uncomfortable for some people, but empowering for and liberating for others, depending on your point of view on this issue, on talking about the legacies of slavery, contemporary slavery, genocide, dictatorships. So when we think about reparative futures, we are also thinking about the work we've already done, the work we still have to do, and ways of doing the same work differently, because it won't be the same, because the world is not the same, and tomorrow is not the same as today, and maybe the end of today won't be the same. So thinking about that, ways of thinking about your questions, and I started talking about joy and hope. You didn't forget that when you were writing your questions. You focused on Freire's esperançar, hope as a verb, literacies of listening and care, affection as resistance. And perhaps what caught my attention the most was this issue as affection as resistance. So if so many times we become skeptical about a better world, a better future, I don't know even what language to use to frame what we do expect for a less unequal world, but it will require hope, joy, and affection. As I remember when I studied Humberto's Maturana book about education, emotions, and love, my professor a long time ago would say, when we get older, we start talking about love. So here I am, I'm the older one now, and I'm the one talking about love as perhaps this word that will be the word to talk about what we are doing, if it's the kind of education we are advocating for, is something that is not an act of love, but love, of course, not the love in the most brega way of thinking of the word, or limited to emotions that are detached from realities, social realities, or lived experiences of us all. But perhaps it's the same way as Freire thought about hope. We can think about this layer of affection guiding us, and to imagine futures. So what I noticed in the questions is that we were thinking from reproduction, how can we go to move towards transformation, if so many times the futures we want to live seem impossible. But our task is to think of them as possible futures. Otherwise, we won't keep going and doing what we do in the studies or practices of critical literacies. And then we see that, okay, so talking about seeds, again, it reminds me of this kind of very naive talk around education, metaphors of gardens, kindergartens, seeds, plants and trees. But yes, we've been doing that. All the questions and reflections showed that we do have these, the presence of small gestures. I like how decolonial scholars use gestures as in the discourses. So we do have these gestures already in everything we do as educators. However, we need more. And so just to conclude and to connect to what Joe's has been bringing, one of the reflections I bring to my student teachers nowadays is this linguistic privilege checklist. Because I teach, the majority of my students are white, North American, monolingual students, and they haven't thought about language as privilege, or language as part of our identities and social identities, and the privileges of being a so-called native speaker of English or standardized English. Then I bring a citizenship privilege checklist when they need to think about the privileges of being either a US-born citizen within the United States, or being a citizen wherever you are, in opposition to being an immigrant, and a refugee, an outsider, depending on how you are welcome or not, or depending on how you shape your new identity in different territories. And this has been very useful to engage student teachers and teacher candidates in seeing their job as language educators, or teachers who teach multilingual learners and who focus their practice on language, to think about everything else related to citizenship, and how language as privilege, or citizenship as privilege, it needs to be challenged as much as we've been challenging the ideas related to other social identities that we perform. So I think I was supposed to use a timer. I haven't. I hope I did it over.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you so much. Let me just. All right. Over to you, Brian. Brian Morgan. Such a long time, my friend. We're here in the backstage of it. Like, why isn't it in Portuguese? Brian speaks Portuguese. I said, Brian understands Portuguese, but he's still learning Brazilian Portuguese, right, Brian? Welcome to Projeto Nacional once again.
Yeah, well, thank you, Daniel. It's been really interesting to hear from my colleagues, to hear from Miriam and Joel. A couple of things that Joel said and Miriam said that kind of came together for me. This idea of time poverty, and lack of time for joy and hope that Miriam is raising. And so it just made me think about, I wanted to get a slide, Daniel, that visually expresses hope, joy, explosions of color, and you have it. So one of the things that you'll notice from my title, Senior Scholar, that it's a polite way of saying a retired professor who's still keeping active. But I have to confess that I do play a lot of music now, if anyone's noticed from my web pages. And but the interesting thing that comes out of these ideas of reading the contributors to question one, the students or people who wrote in, is this feeling, and I used to feel guilty when I was not spending intense time in my job. It was interesting when Joel was looking at that data from Australia, that it's interesting now as a musician, having this other life, that there's a sense of what Miriam was talking about, the importance for teachers of having hope and care of the self. That was a Foucault idea, care of the self as a key component of, as the foundation of care for others. So anyways, it's interesting to reflect back and how the pressure on teachers was so intense. And it was an emotional. So there was that feeling of guilt when I was not committed 110% of my life to publishing, to doing admin work, to spending time with students. And then in a sense, you were kind of removing yourself from the real world of the people that you work with and your relationships with them. So let me get to my second slide here. Okay. So the Canadian condition is, I think, very similar to some of the things that Joel was talking about. There is increased workloads. There are, shockingly, the number of adult ESL teacher positions, which was my initiation, have gone down. The federal government is also cutting back on the number of international students. So university work, even at contract faculty, has been reduced. Adult ESL in the community, which was a key part of integration, is gone. Many of the programs are being closed in the city. And so when you look at it as an adult ESL teacher educator, it's very frustrating. And some of the reasons that I've been looking at or exploring with my colleague Anwar Ahmed is, in a recent publication, this idea of what used to be a nexus. And I think it's very similar to the critical idea of praxis, but a very close, intimate interaction, symbiotic relationship between theory and practice. It was so key in this idea of a nexus that there's a growing gap and dysfunction in this relationship, particularly in universities. And as I mentioned, government cutbacks and policies have included this, increasingly the idea that Joel talked about, neoliberal pressures. Governments now are asking for value audits, or asking administrations to measure the impact of their faculty and their language teachers. At my university, there's also a movement away from disciplines that are not market-oriented or entrepreneurial or part of economic stimulation directly, are being cut back. So at my university, they're no longer allowing enrollment in any of the languages, many of the languages, as a major. And so they're still offering some courses, but you can't enroll in many languages and humanities and arts programs at my university, which is the third biggest in Canada, as a major. And so the intention, again, is to cut back on the number of fourth year, third year courses, and eventually these programs may be closed. So there's, again, movement towards more entrepreneurial kinds of disciplines, movement towards a separation of what's called teaching stream positions with higher teaching loads, more students, more classes, and a separation from research stream faculty who are tasked with, their task now is to increase research impact, to publish more, to get funding. And so there's this kind of division of labor in universities and adult ESL. So these are kinds of trends in Canada around language teacher ed. So to go to the next slide, yeah. So I think Joel mentioned this, Miriam too. We were talking about how teachers now are seen as service providers, almost in like a customer business provider type of relationship. They're not seen as knowledge creators. And research people have accelerated pressures. And you see this now in what's happening over the last at least 10, 15 years in publishing practices. It's incredible how fast things are being published, the number of publications, and how for university instructors, their careers are tied to their research impact. And you see these new tools of measuring your impact that we get through all sorts of sources like ResearchGate, Academia EDU. So this has had an interesting effect of furthering division between what actual teachers do. And it was interesting, Joel's data on tasks like admin tasks that were seen as not contributing to well-being of the teacher versus things like relationship building, interactions with students, those kinds of things. And so the interesting thing that's happened here is that publishing practices have tend towards more kinds of quick turnaround data collection. And it's a kind of form of research that impoverishes the way we understand our classrooms. Related to this, I think at certainly in North American or in Canadian universities, is that there are hierarchies of disciplines within the university. So not only is there pressure on quick turnaround of research, which misses the holistic complexity of classrooms. McKinley has this really good article where he talks about the messiness of language classrooms, that they require long-term, intense, relational look at what goes on from teacher research versus quick kinds of positivistic studies where you generate some data, you have an experimental design, and you send out your paper for publication. So what are the effects on literacies that come out of this is also interesting. You see dominant university disciplines that are more tied to economic activity, to entrepreneurial activity, to outside business kinds of support, take over the thinking of university administrations. They get more hires, they're allocated more resources. And then their ways of seeing the world, their epistemologies. And I used to see this across university meetings, because we used to have an ESL coordinating committee across the whole university. Their way of thinking comes to take over the logic of the overall administration of language teaching and resource allocation. And the effects on literacies is interesting too. I think this was something that Daniel, you've written about, is this movement toward literacias instead of letramentos, this idea that Brian Street used to talk about, autonomous versus ideological literacies. You see governments and schools promoting this idea. Phonics instruction as a surrogate and more easily measured, again, for literacies. And even at the university level, you see this kind of emphasis on a kind of historical European logical form of argumentation, the Tolman model, where argumentation follows strict rules, and then this kind of preparation for citizenship fails to take into account emotion, so-called irrational argument, but emotional argument that doesn't follow these kinds of strict forms and very linear models of literacy that are promoted in this kind of takeover of the university, the epistemologies that universities value. So it's an interesting kind of tension of how these systems have been taken over and accelerated. And the question that comes up is, what can we do as language teacher educators? So let's go to the next slide, see if I've got some stuff there. Yeah, so what are some ideas in language teacher that I'm really interested in? I remember that Alan Luke wrote about this idea, and this came up in my very first visits to the critical literacies group, the multi-literacies group, was moving away from what the New London group called a toolkit, a critical toolkit of instrumental ways of being critical, towards we actually need to think about the identity work of reading ourselves that came up in Daniel and have written about, of thinking about critical dispositions, because Alan wrote about how a toolkit can be appropriated. It can become part of a very oppressive and neoliberal agenda. Every business school now has courses on critical thinking. So this idea of criticality can be appropriated. They talked about, we need to do identity work. We need teachers to always be kind of thinking about their relationship and ways of opposing it. So this kind of work. One of the things that I've been looking at lately with Anwar is the idea of research literacies amongst teachers, giving them a kind of critical disposition of and looking at how they engage with research. And I first got started with this back in the early 2000s, doing adult ESL work with teacher educators around policy. How do teachers relate to policy? Often teachers see their role as very passive. They take the policy, they obey it, they don't see their actual role, and they are the enactors. Policy at the ground level, that they have the space to mediate, to mitigate, and to resist policy. So working with how do teachers engage? What are the teachers' literacies of how they engage with research? And I think part of that is bringing in materials in language teacher ed that emphasize this idea of teachers as knowledge creators, as equal partners, that research, that especially in our field, teachers know exactly their setting and their constraints and how to deal with it. So this idea of teachers as equal partners in the mobilization and promotion of what's knowledge is relevant in the language teacher setting. Jim Cummins has this notion of validity that he calls consequential validity, which he places this as a key component of encouraging teachers to understand that they know best how a particular policy, theory, or research idea or curricular idea works in their specific setting. So this is an important idea too, that it helping teachers see the value of their work is, I think, a key component of doing the kind of work that we're all talking about. And it's identity work. Teachers seeing that their work is not just technology, not just application, but it is also part of co-creation of useful knowledge. And so part of that is looking at alternative research approaches and starting to promote them in language teacher ed. It was interesting getting back to what Joel was saying about teacher activities and the centrality of relationships, and what are research tools that help promote this capacity. And certainly I think things like critical autoethnography, duethnography, narrative, in many ways, those replicate the kinds of relational things we do in classrooms, the kind of conversations we have with students, and how learning comes out of that relationship. And it goes back to some of the things that Miriam was saying about the Freudian dialogic and emotional relationships we have with students. And these things are, in a sense, very unique to language teaching as opposed to other disciplines. I've also talked about earlier things like issues analysis projects in language teacher ed, where you actually get students to go out and research a gap or a problem in their field, but design an intervention which is a specific blueprint that builds up support from other colleagues, and that could be used actually to address the problem. So instead of just writing essays, which we always ask students to do, we ask them maybe to design a webinar, or design a policy statement, or do a workshop, or design a new curriculum intervention. So getting students at an early age to look at ways, language teacher ed students, to look at ways in which they can act in a way that they can be heard by colleagues, and to build up a kind of group of supporters to act positively in their workplaces. So let's go to the last one. Okay, that almost falls off the page. So the other thing, getting back to this idea of the uniqueness of our field, is also to look at what is specific about our discipline in relation, and what are the dangers, what are the strengths and weaknesses, what are the dangers of transdisciplinary work. So this probably takes a long time to go into, but I think the idea is we lose sight, because we're in my university, in many universities, language teaching is really not, it's at the bottom end of the administration's priorities. It's not seen and outside of the university, it's not seen as serious knowledge creation. It's not seen as unique. There's a non-reciprocal relationship with other disciplines. We'll read Foucault, they will not read Lynn Mario or Daniel or Anna. It's just not there. So there's almost a self-marginalization. So I think a key thing is to start to see for us as applied linguists, what is unique and special about our field? What are its keystone practices? And this is the keystone comes from ecology, and it comes from my work on my mother's book, which is because she was an ecologist. But keystone species is the idea that in each setting there will be each ecology has a species whose activity beyond its actual number is essential for the survival of that ecosystem. And it's an interesting thing to think about in disciplines. Are there aspects of our discipline that are essentially unique and that need to be supported and reflected in the specific research models we use and methods, as well as the specific kind of curricular demands we put on students? And so this is more of just like an explorative question, is to look at what are the keystone practices of our field, and are they ever under threat from other disciplines in a presumed transdisciplinary environment, in which there really are disciplines that are more powerful, and university administrators that support those more powerful, or certainly more market-oriented disciplines. So these are the things that I've been working on, is what are research literacies in our language teacher ed that can further the kind of critical literacies we support, and make teachers, or help embolden teachers to realize their potential for social justice in their communities. And I think that's it for me, Daniel.
Brian, thank you. Always similar content. Brian, I was thinking, have you been with us in Projeto Nacional since 2000, since the start, right?
2010 was my first visit. It was
the second year, right?
Second year.
So I wrote something for you there on YouTube, and I see Michelle.
Right.
So I wrote something for you there on YouTube, and vai dar microfonia, eu acho. Anyways, we still have Jamille, Michele. Anyways, we still have Jamille, Michele. Okay. Tava dando microfonia. So we still have a couple of minutes with Jamille, and then we will open for questions. Okay, Jamille, welcome.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Joe,
Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Joe had to leave, which is okay. I hope you can all hear me well. I just wanted to begin by thanking Danielle, Anna, and everyone involved with the National Literacy Project for the real pleasure of being here with Brian, with Miriam, and Joel, and to join you all in these discussions. I haven't prepared a PowerPoint today, as I thought I would keep things a little more conversational today. Just quickly, by way of introduction, I completed my PhD in modern languages in English at the University of São Paulo 9 years ago. And I'm originally from Belém. So that's in northern Brazil, in the Amazon. And I'm now a faculty member at the Institute of Languages, Cultures and Societies at the University of London. That used to be called the Institute of Modern Languages Research, but there's been a change in that name, and for reasons that I think have to do with what I'm going to say today. But this institute, ILCS, is the UK's National Centre for Research in Languages, Cultures and Societies, and our goal is to promote multilingualism, to advocate for the integrated study of languages and cultures, so not separating those domains, and basically fostering interdisciplinarity across the humanities. And just picking up on what Brian just said about how quick turnaround research and narrow models of literacy risk flattening the complexity of classrooms, I'm interested in thinking about the ways in which the same pressures intersect with broader neoliberal logics that reshape professional life and constrain conditions for critical literacies. And it is precisely in this context that the field of modern languages in the United Kingdom is facing a profound crisis, with universities such as Aberdeen and Cardiff proposing to close programs that integrate language and culture, despite investments in language education to meet critical skills shortages. And this process is driven by financial pressures and driven by misconceptions that modern languages are either obsolete or inherently colonial. And such changes, such moves threaten to strip current and future generations of the ability to develop more nuanced global understanding at a time of urgent social, political, and environmental challenges. So what I would like to propose today is that we think a little bit about how separating language from culture reduces it to a marketable tool and undermines the discipline's efforts to confront colonial legacy. So we can practice our discipline in ways that help us confront colonial legacies rather than reproduce them. And diversifying curricula is an important element of that. Expanding linguistic horizons is a key part of existing in an ethical way, in a way that is thoughtful and responsible in relation to the planetary challenges that we are all faced with. Okay, and I really valued Miriam's point about hope, joy, and affection as resources of resistance. And this speaks directly to the question of how education can hold spaces for creativity and care, despite political and structural pressures. And I've read through the reflections shared by Danielle and Anna under the different themes discussed, and I was struck by how they weave together overlapping concerns, and how they weave together concerns about the pressure on teachers, the need for anti-racist and decolonial approaches, the urgency of critical literacies in this context, and the challenges posed by AI, by digital technologies at large. So we are talking about interconnected problems, right? Structural inequalities, working conditions, technological transformations, and how all of those affect how we imagine and practice literacies, right? So I'm also, like Joel, interested in thinking about the intersection between far-right politics and market logics, and thinking about what futures we can offer to students from the working class and who come from contexts of in which they're more faced with economical challenges, and the issue of exhaustion, which seems to be quite prevalent in the reflections, right? So just like I think we all agree that neoliberalism is not merely an economic doctrine of deregulation. It is a political project designed to perpetuate class power. David Harvey has put that point forward very eloquently in A Brief History of Neoliberalism. So this has consequences in the educational domain, right? And how neoliberalism has shaped, privatization, the idea of individual responsibility and individual merit are all very present. And then we could think about other scholars like Wendy Brown, who argued in Undoing the Demos that the financial crisis of 2008 brought the contradictions of neoliberalism to the surface. And also Nancy Fraser in Cannibal Capitalism talked about how we have lived amidst the ruins of neoliberalism, a condition in which democracy, care, and the environment are sacrificed continually to accumulation. And in that context, I was struck by Joel's observation that teachers' labor is increasingly split between meaningful teaching and administrative or data-driven fake work. And this resonates with the argument that neoliberalism is not merely economic, but it is a political project that reshapes professional life, that undermines the conditions for critical literacies. And that's what we are trying to counter here. It also makes us think about the frustration Brian highlighted about the marginalization of teacher knowledge, reminding us that what is sidelined is not teachers' expertise, but teachers' capacity to shape education meaningfully. And Miriam brought another layer to this picture when she discussed how schools often reproduce colonial hierarchies by privileging Portuguese-only instruction, and I'm referring to the Brazilian context, of course, and marginalizing indigenous, quilombola, and migrant literacies. So all of these processes make it visible how neoliberal pressures intersect with long-standing structures of exclusion, right? So speaking of literacies are never neutral. They are always political. Literacies are about critical agency too, about the capacity to imagine futures that go beyond the given order. This resonates with what Brian was saying about promoting teachers as knowledge creators and partners in knowledge mobilization. And I was just telling you about the name change in our institute for the Institute of Modern Languages Research to the Institute of Languages, Cultures, and Societies. And we were trying to make a point about the kind of contribution we can make moving beyond Eurocentric frames. So to interrogate the legacies of nationalism and empire that are part of the history of the discipline, and to engage with transnational perspectives more effectively. And so this was the rationale behind the name change. Yes. How are we doing with time? Because
yes, you can wrap up. Yeah.
Okay. And just a very brief point about exhaustion, because I think it came out.
Are you going to finish with exhaustion, Jamille?
Yeah, but I want to finish on a more hopeful note if we have the time. But it was such a prevalent theme that was mentioned in the reflections, right? How this imperative of performance, of productivity, produces anxiety, fatigue, and how that intersects with digital platforms that can create patterns of interaction that make us feel like less active, maybe more passive, more distracted. So it is a challenge, because for some educators, it might seem that they are competing with the internet for attention, and TikTok and Instagram are kind of feeding this kind of pattern in which people think that they are learning something in just a few seconds. So it's complicated. It is tricky. But we should always go back to Paulo Freire, to bell hooks, to think about how, hope is not passive optimism. It is an active method of engagement. And critical literacy in that context, thinking about critical literacy in relation to hope, it is indispensable to democratic life, right? So, and these are not utopian abstractions. These are grounded practices that can be nurtured with community life, through community life. And just to finish now, it's important to return to Freire in such moments, because Freire insisted that hope is an ontological need, right? If hope is about collectively creating new possibilities. And so we are rebuilding life amidst the ruins of neoliberalism, so to speak, to take those ruins as a site for construction as well. Literacies and critical language education can serve as practices of memory, reparation, and creativity, as Miriam suggested. And what I think, and this is my final note, that what emerges in this context is a call to defend critical language education as a vital platform through which democracy, solidarity and collective forms of life and care can continue to be enacted. So thank you very much for listening, everyone.
Thank you. Guys, I'm not there, but I'd like to ask for a round of applause to all the speakers. If you can. Can we? Oh, yes. We can see the image, but we cannot. Let me try to organize digitality here. So Ana Paula is here with me, Brian, Miriam, and Jamille to say hello and to talk to you guys. First note, sorry. I'd like to apologize. I see many friends from Brasilia, and guys, it's so crazy to organize this, and in-person event, but then with digital, with a hybrid. I forgot to spread the news about this talk. So I apologize for that, but it will be recorded on GL channel, and then we will transfer it to Projeto Nacional de Letramentos. Another note is that, why are we doing this in English? Of course, we always choose the language of the communication, and we have Brian as a partner, as a dear friend. Now he's a musician, guys. He's not even. He hasn't been talking to us, because now he's playing. But it was very important to welcome Brian, who has welcomed our students. João Paulo, my PhD, has just been to Canada, to York. And I think these are very important collaborations, right? Brian, Miriam has welcomed Camila from UFMG, but also from Tocantins. Jamille has just welcomed me as a postdoctoral student at the University of London. Brian has also welcomed me at York University as a visiting scholar. So I'd like to thank you. I was talking to everybody yesterday, Jamille, Brian, and Miriam, that this is our last event at the University of São Paulo in the city of São Paulo. So we're not only emotional, but we're very happy because it has been 16 years we've been doing this. Every year we have worked on this encounter, and now it will happen in the capitals around the country from next year on. So we're very happy. And of course, we would like to thank you for this international collaboration, welcoming our students abroad, but also researching together. We have worked together, written together. We have really, really fought together for better education, better language education. So I'd like to thank you in the name of Projeto Nacional. Thank you so much. And now over to Ana Paula. Yep. No, go there.
Okay. Hi, hello, Brian, Miriam, Jamille, and also Joel. Thank you so much, dear friends, for being with us. Can you hear me well? This section is called engagement, and this word has been chosen by myself and Daniel very carefully, because engagement has to do with bond and promises. And I see lots of bonds and connections in relation to what we do here in Brazil and what you now, Jamille and Miriam, as Brazilians do in your universities, and also Brian for such this long partnership that we carry. So it's quite comforting to meet so much, to see how much in common because we share a common ground in relation to challenges that go beyond Brazil, but also in relation to potentialities, what can be done with regards to what you mentioned, Jamille, that this threat against humanities, this threat against education, and that has to do with a political project that wants to dismantle many good stuff that we've done and we've talked about. And when Brian brought this notion that we sometimes feel guilty if we're not spending time working, but what's to be considered good and bad spending time? You see, this is part of a new liberal life. We know that we cannot be naive. to deny that we are part of the neoliberal society, but it's a neoliberal game. We are all playing this game. There's no room for choices. Well, there is room for choices. And I was wondering, Brian, are we willing to pay the price of the consequences of our own choices when we stop for a while, interrupt our hectic, crazy life, daily life, academic life? Lots of people that come from outside São Paulo and are here immersed in this bond, in this promise, in this engagement that has to do a lot with knowledge production, sharing knowledge, but also affection, joy, and pleasure. And that leads to Miriam, what you're saying, Miriam. I really liked your hope and ethics and affection as resistance. So this is an academic conference, an academic meeting. The National Project is an academic initiative, but it's also full of affection, full of love, full of dreams and hopes. And thank you so much for being with us in this wonderful morning. Thank you. Michele, passo para você. Você tem perguntas aí? Na sala ao lado.
Tell them to... Venham perto do computador para perguntar, gente.
Yes. I can try to see here some of the
There are some questions in the chat.
For example, Fabio brought. Can I, Michele? Valkyria, can you please?
Hi, Valkyria.
Hey, Valkyria, great to see you.
Thank you so much for such a conversation that you are proposing, okay, that you brought to all of us this morning. I think, yesterday we were discussing the idea of beginning. It seems that we should all now start beginning, everything from teacher education, from your talks. So thank you very much. I don't think I need to complement or supplement or add anything else. Just thank you, really. This is this is the conversation that we must have. I hope that we now can expand it all, with everybody here present. You talked about so many things that are important for our universities and our teacher education in Brazil. I think we should, I don't know how to start it, maybe we should start by changing our Letras course, maybe, or the title of our program as well, as Jamille said, or things that, all of the things that have been brought, by you all. Thank you. Let's open it.
Michele, would you like to get any question from the audience?
Or comments?
Should I, or
from
comments?
Brian.
There are many comments. For instance, Brian, could you elaborate a bit more on what you refer to as the weaknesses of inter-transdisciplinarity? This comes from Fabio Bezerra. And there are others. Carolina, hi Miriam, could you tell us more about literacies as remembrancy? I'm very curious about. Thanks a lot. Oh, we do need another section with you guys. Feel free to participate too.
Interesting question. I'll go back to things that something Joel said about teacher labor and some of the data he was collecting. It was interesting to see what was the most fulfilling of and seemed to support their image of who they were as teachers was this idea of relationships and time with students and interacting with students. So other disciplines, so I would say that's probably a keystone, a core dimension of our field, of our discipline. And to the extent that we can support that through curricular design in teacher education, and support that in the kinds of research instruments and approaches and assessment things we can do, that's an important thing. Because and Daniel and I had an interview for a journal once, and we talked about how there's this non-reciprocal relationship with other disciplines, and often as the example I give of the peace studies conference I went to with Stephanie Vandrick, and no one came to our presentation. It was called "What Does Second Language Education Bring to the Table?" It was at Peace Studies, and they have journals. So recently, Anwar did a study of this journal and other peace journals. In our field, this paper's been referenced and cited quite a bit. In peace studies, no interest at all. No one's read it. No one. What do we care about second language education? What do they know about peace? No idea of the uniqueness of our understanding of discourse, of the classrooms in our settings being sites where historical enemies meet at a personal level for the first time. There's just so much about the nature of language classrooms that are relevant to peace studies. But again, there's this disciplinary mindset of silos. And if you have transdisciplinarity that's non-reciprocated, you don't get to see, you don't get to build on the dialogic possibility of how others see you, which in a sense, how language learning takes place. If you don't get that kind of moment of sharing information, of comprehensible output and input, to go back to the old terminology of that, you have no way of working on what needs or what are the strengths and weaknesses of your own discipline. So that's a huge problem. So that for me is that you have to be very careful about transdisciplinarity on what terms, what potential threats does it have for a discipline that universities, for neoliberal reasons, don't value. For the nature of authentic research that doesn't comply with the kind of accelerated demands of research impact and funding and external entrepreneurial activity that universities and are using. So those are things that question.
No, Brian, I remember this interview, and I really like this part. It kept me thinking, because what you're saying, I think it is the case of Brazil, but it talks about the humanities as a field, how they see humanities. You mentioned this entrepreneurial, like our funding agencies here in São Paulo, they just talk about this now. So, humanities, okay, but language education, language teacher education, even education, I would say, they are not areas of interest. Therefore, I think this is my dream, Brian. Let me tell you, this is my dream before I retire. Like to have the recognition of everything that we've done and we've constructed so far in terms of contribution with language identities, critical literacies, critical education. So what we are doing, that we're doing our job, let's say between quotation marks, we're transforming people through language education, but not with the recognition. So it's always a fight to get funding to organize this event. Let me tell you, Brian, we would like to bring you here to Brazil, as I told you, but there's no funding. So all of this, is the lack of recognition, but also this non-reciprocal transdisciplinarity. I like this idea, and I'll be thinking about it. Thank you for that, because I will study this a little bit more, because I have been defending transdisciplinary language education, language teacher education, as I've talked to Joe already about this, but at the same time, it's always non-reciprocal. We are always, let's say, getting knowledge from other fields, but people are not reading the wonderful theoretical production and the proposals that we have for education. So yeah, this is something that I've thought about. I don't know if there are more questions from. Did you want to?
No, there is no time, or maybe you could because we are running out of time. You could probably a few more words then we plan to save those beautiful reflections and questions, and maybe we can continue this discussion. Keep on dialoguing. So would you like to spend those
Final words, yeah.
final minutes with final thoughts? Feel free, Joe, Jamille, Miriam.
Yeah, I'm happy to contribute, but Miriam, would you like to start?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, no, thank you so much, everyone. And I just want to maybe say that I think one of the main takeaways for me from our conversation today is how, neoliberal reforms, new nationalist rhetoric, and cultural battles intertwine to shape education today. Well, in the UK and in other places around the world, the far right has grown by presenting itself as a way to defend the working class, and this is not new. I was just thinking about how history repeats itself. It would be great to talk about that in depth, but I was thinking about Thatcherism in the UK, and from the late 70s to the early 90s, and how this paradox between dismantling welfare and solidarity under the guise of modernization was already there. And today we have similar logics at play. You have this far-right rhetoric and people like Nigel Farage mobilizing anti-immigration discourse and culture wars to turn economic frustrations into moral panics. So, and I think that in Brazil we can see parallel dynamics in the polarization of education, where schools and teachers are cast as ideological battlegrounds, accused of indoctrination, as Joel mentioned. And so I'm just thinking about this, the importance of thinking about new nationalism and cultural wars, moral panic, as strategies of division that end up constraining or narrowing the democratic role of education. But this could be expanded on if we had the time. So yes.
So I would like to say that you are asking me about these quilombola literacies or literacies of remembrances. These are all that, didn't come from me. These concepts, they came from the questions that you asked and the notes that Danielle shared with us. So that's why I said, my title says responses from you, because when I read the comments and the questions, I thought there's a lot here that we've been discussing for such a long time, but with new add-ons, like because we situate the same problems within new contexts and a new generation of scholars doing different research from different frameworks. So, for instance, in terms of quilombola epistemologies, I've never directly worked with quilombola education, but I've been working with the legacies of the African diaspora in Brazil for a long time and infusing that in my actions as a scholar. So, for instance, when internationalization became this big thing in our campuses, I remember bringing international students to Ouro Preto, a historical town near Belo Horizonte, and I would have a historian introducing Ouro Preto from the perspective of all the technologies and knowledges that the enslaved Africans brought to the city. So it was a tour that would empower and create new narratives about the African presence. And Ouro Preto is generally not approached like that. People will visit the mines and the slavery museum, but need other perspectives to tell our history. And I did that not just for international students, but I would have domestic students come together just to make sure there would be this transnational dialogue around these new discoveries for everybody. So the international ones reflecting from those legacies in their own countries, and we had students thinking from that perspective for the first time. So this is an example. Also, I remember using texts from a book called The Psychology of Blacks, which is an old book from the early 2000s. Nowadays, everything published yesterday somehow old. But yes, and then it was just a way of approaching psychology without using the myths of Greek literature, of Greek culture, but framing psychology around African myths. So these were tiny gestures or small efforts to bring different epistemologies to what I was doing a long time ago. And I regret that I'm not the part of a generation that is approaching applied linguistics through the lenses of everything that the social movements are bringing to our campuses. I've done that, but not with the same energy of a scholar in the very beginning of the career, or much less skeptical, because skepticism, unfortunately, we need to struggle. At least I have to struggle against it, because if it depended on me and my indoctrination of my students, all the Brazilians would be bilingual. At least the Brazilian youth would be bilingual right now, or multilingual, and racism would have changed its face a long time ago. So I hope we could indoctrinate our students, but we can't, right? And that's when Brian talked about his dispositions. Yes, that's so. I didn't bring those concepts as something that I've been doing, but as a group, we've all been doing those literacies. So if you talk more to your colleagues in this room, you'll have a chance to get much better answers than anyone I can provide. Thank you again. And I hope we have part 2 of the conversation, or that we could develop a polyethnography, Brian, Joe, Jamille, and I, to continue that, because I think there's so much in common. So this is an invitation to publish. Otherwise, we perish, unfortunately. Thank you.
Miriam, we are already planning here. Ciclo 4.
Good.
Joe, any final words? Good to see you.
Words. I think that the way forward is to occupy the spaces that we can and build community so that we have a critical mass. I have to say, Valkyria, you are a great inspiration for both of those tasks. And I wonder if I could pass to you to say a couple of words at this point.
Valkyria?
Yeah, Valkyria. Final words?
I think she's crying. No? Oh.
Back to you.
Much, Thank you so much. You all have inspired us, together as a collective. That's my idea. We haven't done anything alone, and I'm very much sure about the contributions that you all have given to our project and to our ways of thinking, our ways of expanding views, knowing more. I tell you, I come from dictatorship times, as you know. By that time, we could not discuss the idea critique, the idea, and the word critique and criticality could not be spoken, in our universities. And this is the reason why we started talking about something that could produce critique without making use of the word critique. And this is how we started making use of the verbs expand and amplify. And when we know more about other views, we are actually given opportunities for people to review the way they see the world, right? So this is how we started developing critique in our universities without making use of the word critical and criticality, right? Let's expand. And this is how I thank you so much. You have expanded our views so much. And this has really, nurtured very much our ways of seeing the world and seeing education in Brazil, so it's a collective way of doing things, right? And acting. Thank you so much for that. I look forward for the continuation of this panel, really, right? I wanted to say more about something that Joel said in terms of new nationalism and new liberalism. I think that we have started discussing this idea of positivism and liberalism and new liberalism in Brazil in the 80s, right? And it seems to us that there is liberalism, new liberalism are so strong and so intelligent that they always find ways to renew or redress the way, they introduce themselves to society. And nowadays, they have come back with new nationalism, in my views, right? So we cannot, overlook this. This is so important, right? Miriam, let me just finish with this, okay? Because I said I wouldn't compliment, but I have to say something. Miriam, I have been one of the let's say, people, one of the professors that have been given a lot of motivation for people to rethink this idea that foreign language is not a unique foreign language. And especially people have to be sensitized in relation to what languages are and the languages of the others. And yesterday we were discussing this, and I said, we have to know a little bit more. For kids, it is much more important to know the language of the quilombolas, the language of the other people speak. I mean, not only foreign languages, the way that it is understood nowadays, right? So this is how I would make changes in our curriculum. And maybe we can discuss this a little bit more right here as a continuation. Thank you. Thank you all, for everything that you've brought to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Valkyria.
Brian. Final words.
Any final words? Final thoughts? To wrap up our session?
I just want to take up what Valkyria said, is how much I've learned, and my colleagues at York and Glendon, how we've been so enriched by these relationships, conversations, opportunities to meet, and the chance to bring our students into your spaces to see how other ways to teach languages, and to relate language to culture and society. So it's been the highlight of my academic career, and just at a personal level, it's been wonderful. What an experience. Thank you all.
Same to us, Brian. Same to us. Guys, thank you so much. It was a very thought-provoking session, inspiring, enlightening, empowering. Muito obrigada. Thank you so much on behalf of National Project.
Thank you. Obrigado, gente. Thank you.
Até uma próxima. Com certeza.
Thank you so
Pessoal
much.
da sala, Daniel e eu estamos chegando.
Na verdade, a gente está indo embora, gente. Até o ano que vem. Tchau.
Obrigada.
Bye, Brian. Bye, Jamille. Hello, good to see you. Thank you so much, Miriam. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Okay.